Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. Today, I want to talk about another example of injustice in America. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because this case has not received the type of attention that it really deserves. In Eutawville, South Carolina, an unarmed African American man was killed by the police. Here we have another example of an unarmed black man being killed by the police. So he was killed in 2011. And the case recently went to trial. And before I go into the details about the trial for that case, I want to talk about the actual facts. This case stems from a traffic violation. It's not a case where someone was in the middle of committing some kind of heinous crime or some kind of serious crime or some kind of felony. This all stems from a traffic ticket. So a young African American woman was driving her vehicle. She was stopped by the police, and the police officer went to give her a ticket. But before he gave her the ticket, she actually called her father for help because she feared for her safety. So her father arrived at the scene when the officer was giving her a ticket. And the father's name is Bernard Bailey. He's a 54-year-old African American man. So he proceeds to argue with the officer about this ticket. They argue briefly, and then everybody goes their separate ways. The woman receives her ticket, and everybody leaves. And that was supposed to be the end of it. You get a ticket, you usually just pay the ticket, and you're on with your life. It's over and done with. So 2 months later, this African American man, Mr. Bailey, went to town hall to go ahead and pay the ticket or to take care of the ticket. When he arrives at town hall, he is surprised and shocked to learn that a warrant has been issued for his arrest. And the warrant was issued based on that argument that he had with the police officer, a very brief argument. And the warrant was for obstruction of justice. So what you have here is a police officer who is intoxicated with power, who abuses his power because he feels like he was violated in some kind of way. He feels like his ego has been stepped upon. Basically, you have a butthurt police officer who wants to get back by manipulating the system against an innocent civilian. So he gets to this town hall and he finds out that there's a warrant for his arrest. So obviously he's shocked and surprised. So he proceeds to leave the building and go to his truck so he can leave. This is Mr. Bailey I'm talking about. He tries to leave. This officer follows him. And as he's starting up his car, the officer reaches into the car. And as Mr. Bailey is pulling off, this officer proceeds to shoot him 3 times in the chest. Again, Mr. Bailey is unarmed. And according to news reports, there was no risk of this officer being hit by the truck or anything. Mr. Bailey did not threaten the officer. So this officer just took this brother's life, took this black man's life. And basically, it was over a dispute about an unwarranted warrant for this man's arrest. And that's a disgrace. So this brother gets killed and charges are brought against this officer. He's charged with murder. And he faced 30 years in jail. The case went to trial, and there was a mistrial the first time. 9-3 voted to convict the officer of murder. And this officer's name is Richard Combs. So after the first mistrial, there was a second trial. And in that trial, there was also a mistrial. 8 of the jurors voted to convict, and 4 voted against that. So you had another mistrial. So instead of bringing the case to trial for a third time, the prosecution reached a plea bargain agreement with the officer. So instead of him getting the 30 years in jail, he ended up receiving 1 year of home detention and 10 years of a suspended sentence, and then 5 years of probation. So in terms of actually serving time, this man is serving 0 time in jail, and he's only serving 1 year of home detention. Basically, he's being put on punishment. He's being put in timeout, much how you put a child in timeout for acting up. We're talking about a black man's life that was taken here. He was killed, and this is all the punishment that is imposed against the killer. This is absolutely insane. It is ridiculous and absurd. It is a mockery of this justice system that someone can actually take a black man's life and receive no time in prison at all for that crime. And then on top of that, the fact that the media has not focused on this injustice, that just tells you how our lives really don't mean shit in this country. Our lives don't matter at all. Our lives never have mattered. And if we don't stand up, our lives will never matter. People constantly criticize the Black Lives Matter movement. They constantly say all lives matter. Well, if all lives matter, you wouldn't have cases like this, where a black man who was merely trying to stand up for his daughter ends up dead and the killer walks free. As long as things like that happen, there will be a need for a Black Lives Matter movement. There will be a need to say that Black Lives Matter. We have countless examples of this type of injustice that happens. In North Carolina, a police officer killed an African-American man named Jonathan Farrell, who was seeking assistance after a car accident. He was unarmed, he was shot dead, and the killer got away with it. There was a trial at first, an indictment, a trial, a mistrial happened. And then instead of retrying that killer, they basically said, you're free to go. So while he's enjoying his life, his family, Jonathan Farrell's family, suffers the pain of loss and death. We have the example of Eric Garner, a black man who was choked to death on camera. The officer was not charged with anything. He wasn't charged, so obviously he wasn't convicted. He just walked, despite the fact that you had evidence of this crime. You had the example of Trayvon Martin, a young African-American teenager who was simply going home from the store, and he ended up with a bullet in his heart. The jury let the killer go. And the killer, as you all know, his name is George Zimmerman. This killer is now a celebrity. This killer signs autographs. This killer is on Twitter boasting about killing Trayvon Martin. This killer used a racist symbol, the Confederate flag, as his avatar. This is the kind of country we live in. We have the example of Michael Brown, another African-American teenager killed, unarmed, killed by the police, and the killer walks free, not charged with a crime, just free to live out his life. And often these killers, they get support from the public for killing black people. They become heroes for killing black people. People set up fundraisers for these people to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend these people that kill black people. So as long as that type of injustice continues, there will always be a need for us to demand that Black lives matter. And the people who criticize the movement are completely clueless, because time and time again, police kill black people and nothing happens. They kill us with impunity. It's virtually like it's open season on black people. We cannot afford to sit by and let this nonsense continue to happen. Now, they have tried to discredit the movement based on the killing of a police officer recently in Harris County, Texas. Now, there's been a lot of uproar about this killing, and they have demanded that the movement be held accountable. They're crying alligator tears over this cop. They're mourning the loss of this cop, and they expect us to do the same. But as people cry about this cop, as they cry their alligator tears, nobody cries for black people who are killed by these police. Nobody cries for us. They don't cry for the unarmed black men and boys killed by the police, who are unarmed, killed by the police. They don't cry for Tamir Rice. They don't cry for Tamir Rice. They don't cry for Trayvon Martin. They don't cry for Michael Brown. They don't cry for Jonathan Ferrell. They don't cry for Eric Garner. They don't cry for all the countless others. Instead of crying for the black people that lose their lives, they rationalize and justify the killing of black people. They always manage to find a way to dehumanize us and to justify the brutality that is inflicted against us. As long as they don't give a damn about our lives, they can't expect us to be crying over the loss of some dead cop. And I'll just end on this note. We all know about the case of Michael Vick, the famous football player, who was convicted for fighting dogs. He received a 23-month sentence for fighting dogs. And then here we have this example of this cop, Richard Combs, who kills a black man, and he doesn't receive 1 day in jail. All he receives is a year of home detention, where he can chill, sit back and watch television, just relax. So that tells me that in this society, dogs' lives have more value than black people's lives.